When I was a child, I was obsessed with the game of baseball. I loved playing it. I loved watching it. I loved reading about it. This week in baseball for me was pornographic. Well, I loved baseball so much that here in the house I grew up in, when I would have a game on Saturday morning, I would wake up at 5:30 or 6 before the farm reporter, while the farm report was on, and I would sit down there in the family room in the set of windows on this side. I would lay out my uniform, every aspect of my uniform, and my glove. I don't think I had a bat, but I was that excited about baseball, that keyed up, that I would just, get up literally at the crack of dawn. Probably was the crack of dawn, but at the first light, I would be up, ready to play baseball. That day, one of the worst days, the day of special training, was similar. I got up. It was the middle of the summer, a day very much like today, kind of sunny, maybe a little bit of hazy, but just starting to warm up. I would have gotten up at, again, like the crack of dawn. And the reason I got up at the crack of dawn was because I was serving for Father LeRoy Valentine, Father V as we called him. And that day was going to be special. Every day with Father Valentine was special, but I knew that day was going to be particularly special because of what I refer to as special training. My painting is entitled Special Training because I don't know if that's exactly what it was called, but that's how I regarded it. That's how it was presented to me. So it was a summer day right before the 4th of July, just like today. My parents were out of town. Basically every other year, and sometimes every year, they would go to a big convention at the Greenbrier in West Virginia, a big, I guess, an American Bar Association convention or something. So when I was growing up, I basically never spent the 4th of July with my parents. I would spend it with a babysitter, Mrs. Bartels, and as we got older, kind of younger babysitters who could drive us around. Mrs. Bartels didn't drive, but we didn't need to drive. So my parents would leave. They would leave town for the convention. This is the week of or the week before the 4th of July, right around the 4th of July, just before it. My parents would leave and Father Valentine would call me up and ask me to serve for him. I know it happened at least once. I think it happened several times. To do what was referred to as special training. And I call it special training because that's how it made me feel. So I got up at the crack of dawn again, excited as I would, were I to have a baseball game. It was the summer, so this would be the old people's mass, which, normally the old people in the parish would go to mass with us kids, I think at 8 o'clock. But in the summer, the morning mass shifted back to 9 in the morning, 9 a.m. And there'd be 15 or 20 people there. Normally, when you'd serve a mass, there'd be three servers, but because it was the old people's mass, you only needed one server. Or at least whenever I served the old people's mass in the middle of the summer, there was just one server. There'd just be one aisle for communion, so you really technically only needed one server. You didn't need to cover 3 aisles like you would in an all-school mass. And we went to all-school masses every day of the week when we were kids. So we went to mass 6 days a week. And the gist of this idea of special training is that the thing that made it special was that Father Valentine was going to teach me some special things. And I didn't find out until I got there that he was going to teach me things that he shouldn't be teaching me, that lay people didn't know, that lay people typically weren't taught, because it was too much for lay people to handle. This is just priest-only stuff. But because he knew that I was so mature, so special, Father Valentine knew that he could trust me with the information that he was going to give me. So I got up, again, right before 7 o'clock, and this is in the middle of the summer. Got up, would watch TVs, I'd watch TV, I'd watch the farm report, and then just whatever the hell was on, after the farm report. And then about, 7:45 or so, on a day like this, I would walk up here, I'd walk down Black Creek Lane, walk down the length of Black Creek Lane. Well, and normally I wouldn't take this path, but I think I took this path because the bridge over McKnight Road, or the McKnight Road bridge over Black Creek was closed. So I ended up having to walk down the lane to this stone wall here that's at the end of the lane. You've got, this is like a quarter mile or so. And there's this kind of 5-foot stone wall here at the end of Immaculata. There used to be a thing in the middle with the fire hydrant used to be in the middle of the circle here, and we would ride our bikes around this. So I would come over to this wall. It's Billy Hassett's house over there. Billy Asshead, as we called him. He turned into a jerk. Put my foot up on these fences here. I guess it's a 6-foot wall. Climb up on top. There'd be the blood bugs up on top of the wall, the little red bugs. And then I would hop this fence, and then Immaculata is just kind of over there in the distance, and I would walk over to Immaculata, be there, in time to get everything set up. I guess I'd leave about 8:30 because I had to be there at 8:45 to get ready for Mass. For this very special Mass with Father LeRoy Valentine, the Catholic priest who abused me when I was a child. So as I walk back down Black Creek Lane, I'm walking down from the wall, walking down the lane, the quarter mile or so, maybe an eighth of a mile. I should talk about clericalism and what it does to you, what it did to me. I was a very nice, sweet kid when I was little. I think that's one of the reasons I was abused, is because I was very nice and sweet and trusting. And what happened to me as a result of this special training, when Father LeRoy Valentine gave me the power to turn ordinary bread, in my case a communion wafer, into the literal body of Jesus Christ. The real presence, as Catholics say. That's the whole point of the real presence, is that during the Eucharist, a communion wafer, a piece of bread, becomes the literal body of Jesus Christ. Now, I remember what being granted that power did to me. Basically, it turned me into a jackass, an arrogant jackass. Because suddenly I felt, and it's not just that I felt, I knew that I was better than everyone else. Do you know how to turn? Were you taught the prayer, the consecration prayer, that turns a communion wafer or just a regular piece of bread into the literal body of Jesus Christ? No, you don't. I do. I thought I did. And I can only imagine, given what that knowledge, that supposed ability did to me, I can only imagine what it does to priests. I've talked to Sister Helen, and I've talked about Sister Helen. She described the priests at Immaculata as arrogant, lazy, and entitled. And I think it was because the power of the Eucharist did that to them. The power of the Eucharist transformed them, just as the consecration prayer transforms the Eucharist. In this case, the power of the Eucharist, being granted the power of the Eucharist, transformed ordinary devout Catholic men into arrogant clericalist assholes, and did worse for some of them, for abusers like Father LeRoy Valentine, my abuser. And the problem with the Catholic sex abuse crisis and the problem with the Catholic Church is none of that has changed. That same clericalism, that same arrogance that results from being granted the power to transform bread into the literal body of Jesus Christ, none of that has changed. And I think that explains a lot of the attitude of the Catholic Church, the arrogance of the Catholic Church and its priests, their failure, the failure of so many priests to embrace and follow the whole Jesus thing. And I'm passing, it's Chipper's house there, it's Blaine's house there, Tony Newman's house is back there. This is Mrs. Gardner's house, the Hafner's house. But, you know, of all the things that have not changed in the Catholic Church as a result of the sex abuse crisis, the Eucharist and what that does to people is one of the things that hasn't changed. And when people talk about clericalism and the problem of clericalism and why the problem of clericalism isn't going away, isn't being solved, it's because of what I was taught, what I was so jazzed up about, things that got me up at first thing in the morning in front of that window, this window on this side in the family room, until that, what that does to people is reckoned with. And I built this wall right here. This is the house I grew up in, number 3 Black Creek Lane. This is the park. Until there's a reckoning for and with the clericalism and what the Eucharist does to people, to priests. And I know what it does to priests because I know what it did to me, the arrogance that came with it. And you'll say, well, I was just a kid and I wasn't ready to handle it. Well, but the problem is that I see that same arrogance in the priests. I see this, especially in the young priests now, who are supposedly so much better, but I don't see it. What I see is the same arrogance, the same entitlement, the same arrogant indifference, the same lack of the whole Jesus thing. You know, these are priests who really are utterly indifferent to survivors because they didn't do it and it didn't happen in their era, which of course ignores the whole Jesus thing and the Good Samaritan. You know, the Good Samaritan took responsibility for something that wasn't his problem. He just saw someone who needed help. That's not the modern Catholic Church, and I think it's because of the Eucharist. I always remembered it. Not the worst of it, but a lot of it. You know, the stuff before, the stuff after, some of the during, although the during kind of faded away. I just didn't understand it. I didn't understand what was happening to me, what was being done to me. So I'm here in a neighborhood called Tanglewood, which is on the other side. So at the top of that wall, or top of that hill over there, which you can just barely see it, at the top of that hill is the brick wall. There used to be a willow tree in front of this house, a big weeping willow tree. So to continue the story of that day, which may have been the worst day, although those may have been 2 different days in special training. So I hopped that wall, ran down the fence. That's the wall that's at the end of Black Creek Lane, between the Wolf's house on this side and the Hassett's house on that side. And like I said, I always I always remember this. I remember this was so important to me that I always remembered this. I remember I was so keyed up that I always remembered this. And this is something that I've really just kind of understood in the past few days. I need to communicate to people, but it also kind of explains some stuff. What you need to understand is this memory of special training and why I didn't think anything of it. You know, why the abuse stuff kind of got covered up and washed away and painted over, is that until a few years ago, today, the day of special training and maybe the worst stuff, was one of the greatest days of my life. Was one of the coolest days of my life, ranking up there with my wedding day and the birth of my children. Being granted the power of the Eucharist, being granted the knowledge of the consecration prayer by a Catholic priest was that big of a deal that it overwhelmed everything else. Okay, yeah, I was sexually abused, but I was also granted the power of the Eucharist. And the fact is that what my abuser, Father LeRoy Valentine, did is he used the Eucharist, the consecration prayer, to distract me. He knew that I was going to be so distracted by and so taken with what he gave me, or supposedly gave me, that I wasn't going to notice what he was doing to me down there. I would be so focused on getting the consecration prayer right and doing the ritual correctly that I wouldn't notice what he was doing to me. And I remember this part of the walk, walking past the Cronin's house, or what I thought or wondered was the Cronin's house, you know. And again, I always remembered this. This is one of my favorite memories. The memories where I felt the coolest, the memories where I felt the most special, which is why I refer to it as special training. Whether that's how it was presented or not, that's how I took it. It was presented to me as special. It made me feel special because, you know, here you've got a priest saying, all right, I shouldn't be teaching you this. Lay people can't handle this stuff, which is why they're not taught it or even told about it. But because you are so special, so smart and so clever and everything, I feel like I can trust you with this secret. That's what he told me. Fuck. So that's the attitude I went into as I was making this walk. And Immaculata there's a curve coming up. Immaculata is just around this curve. So that was the attitude that I had as I was making this walk. This is like a 15-minute walk. So it's like 8:30 or so in the morning. I'm headed up for the 9 o'clock mass up at Immaculata, and there you can see there's Immaculata up there, up at the top of the hill. It's the week of, or the week before the 4th of July. My parents are out of town at the Greenbrier at the Broadmoor. I've taken this route rather than the Ethical Society route because I think, and I've actually tried to verify this, the bridge over Black / Burroughs Creek on McKnight Road was out. They were working on shoring up the foundations, and I think MSD was doing the work on the foundations, taking an oxbow out of there, putting a whole bunch of those, those big stainless steel mesh nets that they fill with rocks. That's basically what they put at the foundations of the bridge over Black / Burroughs Creek at McKnight Road. So I had to take this route rather than it's the Twin Fawns. I think it's Twin Fawns that kind of parallels Black Creek and Black Creek Lane and goes up behind the Ethical Society, where I would cut through someone's yard and let this truck go. But so this is the intersection of Tanglewood and Immaculata. Here's Immaculata. Basically, so the church is that big structure under the spire. See those vertical windows, those set of like 6 or so vertical windows, that's the sacristy. The priest side of the sacristy on this side. The altar boy side of the sacristy is on that side. So I would have gotten up here by 8:45 or so. It's the middle of the summer, so there isn't much going on. There are only 15 or 20 people who are going to be at this mass. You know, it's the old people mass in the middle of the summer. You know, kids aren't going to mass, only the old people. So we would do like a half an hour mass. So by 9:30 or so, mass would be done. And what happened, so if you've seen my painting, Special Training, The Ugly Truth, it happened back in here. That door, you see that silver door, not the white overhang. The white overhang door is the stage right door of the church. The silver screen door in the lowered block structure, that's the door to the priest side of the sacristy. So I would serve the mass. You know, you only need one server because there's just one aisle. They're just 15 or 20 guys. There's 15 or 20 people at the old people's mass. And then afterwards in the back of the sacristy, basically here, these vertical windows over here, it's basically split 2/3 to the priest, 1/3 for the altar boys. That's where the special training happened. Now, I don't know if these are two separate events that I'm confounding, but then at some point I went from the church and the sacristy over to the rectory. And the rectory is where the worst stuff happened. This is the rectory here. And to the point of my friend the Cardinal lived and worked with my abuser, Father LeRoy Valentine, for 2 years, from the summer of 77 to the summer of 79 in this building. There were basically 3 priests in there all at the same time. Father Valentine, my friend the Cardinal, and Monsignor Cornelius Flavin, all living in this building. And supposedly my friend the Cardinal had no idea what was going on, even though he lived with my abuser for 2 years. My abuser, you know, they all lived together in this relatively small building. And the worst part is that my abuser, Father LeRoy Valentine, made very little effort to disguise what he was doing, to hide what he was doing. I really don't think he made any effort. I don't think Valentine made any effort to hide what he was doing. What happened is, if the other priests, my friend the Cardinal and Monsignor Flavin, didn't want to see it, they would go to another part of the rectory. They would go to the TV room, which I think was upstairs. Well, I'm not sure. Or they would go up into their rooms and, you know, read in their rooms. But that's really the most frustrating part about the story of my abuse, is how little effort Father Valentine had to put into hiding what he was doing. Now, there was nobody else around during the special training, which took place in the sacristy, the priest side of the sacristy behind the Church of the Immaculata. And there were no other priests around because, you know, this is just the old people's mass, so you don't need multiple priests to cover communion. One priest could cover communion. I don't know where Dolan or Monsignor Flavin would have been. But supposedly, and just so you can see, this is Immaculata. This building here on the end, that used to be the convent. They ended up demolishing that and turning it into more offices. But Immaculata is mostly the way it was when I was a child here. And here's the rectory of Immaculata, which you can see is a relatively small building, especially with 3 priests living in there. And then you had all these nuns and other women who all but bathed. They did everything except bathing the priests who lived in the rectory here at Immaculata. They may have bathed them too, I don't know. Sister Helen was pretty contemptuous of the priests and the treatment of the priests and what the nuns were expected to do for the priests. But so you've got the rectory here. On this side is the kitchen. That's where I've talked about the risk in the pizza party. And that's where kind of my abuse started. He had us over. He had a bunch of guys over into the rectory, which is just across the street from the school. So priests could call, well, Valentine would call guys over from the school to the rectory and abuse them during school hours. But, you know, so my abuse started, well, it was during confession there in the church, and then it progressed on to risk and pizza party that happened in the rectory. Supposedly Dolan knew nothing about what was going on there. But then you get to the worst day, which may have been the same day as the special training. You know, he may have just been testing me with the special training. But then essentially what happened, and I've always, like I said, I've always remembered this, but I didn't know what it meant. I came flying out of this door, walking over this hill. You've got the church right here, and this light here in the ground, which they've actually repaired. That light there in the ground is really important in my story, because I remember vaulting over that light and running here behind. That's the altar boy side of the sacristy. This is the priest side of the sacristy. This silver door here in the stone, that's the door on the right side of my painting. And we're here at the Immaculata in Richmond Heights, just up the hill from the Galleria. The Galleria is just there. You can see downtown Clayton just there over my shoulder. You know, it's no fun. It's no fun being here. And the thing that makes it even less fun is knowing how many people knew and sacrificed us. Thus the title of my podcast. I know that Sister Helen knew. She told me, Mrs. Glarner told her within days of Valentine showing up, that Mrs. Glarner knew there was something wrong with Valentine. Mrs. Glarner told Sister Helen, who told Monsignor Flavin, who told her to keep her mouth shut and never speak of it. And Sister Helen's rationalization, which she gave to me, I think December 2018, was, but the Catholic Church does so much good. That was Sister Helen Petropolis's rationale for keeping her mouth shut, for just following orders about the Catholic sex abuse crisis, what was being done to me and to us. And, you know, the reason I'm doing this and these videos is because, first and foremost, I want to warn people. I was not warned. My family was not warned. Other people were warned. People who had older brothers figured it out. I was the oldest, though, and my mom was basically unreligious and eventually became went back to the Presbyterian faith. But so she wasn't in the Catholic circles like the other moms. And because she wasn't a good Catholic girl, my mom didn't get the warnings about Father Valentine. And my dad was busy at work trying to make partner, and really just kind of trusted the Catholic Church and trusted Sister Helen and the rest of the folks at the school to do their jobs and protect me and to protect us. And that's not what happened. People instead chose to protect the church rather than children. Something that's still happening. And people need to be warned about that. And I refuse to allow what happened to me to happen to anyone else. I'll be damned if I allow what happened to me to happen to anyone else. And if Jesus Christ can do what he did, entering Jerusalem on Palm Sunday to a certain and known fate, then I can do this.